This FedGov Today program is sponsored by EY. On this edition of FedGov Today, a transformation launches at DLA. 4 possible paths for the future of AI. And the Navy's readiness effort gets a shot in the arm. Welcome to FedGov Today in Washington, D.C. and around the world on the American Forces Network. I'm Francis Rose. 4 components make up a transformation that's underway at the Defense Logistics Agency. The leader of DLA lists those 4 as data, divesting legacy services, mission reassessment, and an infrastructure footprint review. Lieutenant General Mark Simmerly, U.S. Army's the director of DLA. General, welcome. It's great to have you here. Before we get into the individual components, what overall is your goal with this mission of transforming the agency?
Well, the agency has to be transforming at the pace of the rest of the joint force. Each of the services are rapidly transforming to meet the challenges of the future. The combatant commands are rapidly reforming and reformatting their plans, and DLA can't afford to wait. We need to be at the advent of change within the department as well.
How much of the transformation that you're undertaking is systems, and how much of it is allowing for new gear that the services have, new parts to supply that gear, that kind of thing?
It's a great question, and what I'd say is our transformation is and has to be comprehensive. So we describe it everything from people, precision, posture to partnerships are key to our transformation.
I want to come back to the people piece in a moment, but we'll start with the first of those 4 elements, data. What data is it that's important to you now and that you expect to be important to you in the future?
Well, the first thing I'd say about data is it is our most decisive commodity. And of course, a lot of our data traditionally has been siloed and unavailable for the analytical purposes that we need it to be. So the mission now is to collect the data, develop an ecosystem so it's accessible, and then apply state-of-the-art analytical tools so we can put it to work. And that means not only systemic changes, building our ecosystem and introducing the newest technology, but also training our workforce so they can implement it fully.
Regarding the collection, how much of what you're undertaking is collecting new data that you didn't before, and how much of it is kind of corralling the data that you've already collected to make it available?
It's a great question as well. I mean, we've got an enormous archive, as you might imagine, and we produce many things. Data is probably first among those, and it's not just our data, it's service data as well that we have to be able to incorporate. And so there is a past historical effort to be able to understand historical trends and those sorts of things that require us to reach into our archives. But at the same time, the pace of new data that's being produced and to ensure that it's formatted and that it's interoperable and that our systems are interoperable with the services is one of the key efforts. We originally thought that the key challenge was technology, but it's really not technology any longer. The technology has come on board. It's now the procedural aspect and the human aspect of interoperability that we have to drive change in.
Is the main element of that just trying to change the culture and teaching your people this is now a priority, this is the way we're going to do business moving forward?
That's certainly part of it, making sure everybody's familiar with our plan and that we're equipping them to put the state-of-the-art tools to work. But it's also going back to the services and examining this question of whose data are we talking about. It's really our data. So this automatic exchange of data rather than periodic exchange of spreadsheets. We want to have this continuous automatic exchange that allows us to really put those digits to work.
I read these 4 pillars in the order that you wrote about them, and I imagine you did it on purpose because the next one's divesting legacy services. I imagine one of the challenges for data is that it's stuck in these legacy systems that make it difficult to do what you just described. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, our legacy debt is strong, and we've had a long history of automation, but a lot of our data is trapped in these legacy systems, and they're just not accessible for us. So we have had to reduce the number of systems, and that has taken not only technical effort but cultural effort to do away with things that we've developed an expertise in certain places. So that's one of the primary efforts, is to upgrade those. And it's been part about modernizing our whole information system environment where we're taking on board, big tools like S/4HANA in the SAP environment or our warehouse management system, both of which have come on board in the last year or so. And those are, tremendous drivers that really set the table for the change that's taking place at the pace it's taking right now.
A sidebar benefit, I imagine, that a lot of other leaders in the department have talked about in this area is that modernization of information systems and business systems gives you more insight into what you need to know about being audit ready. Is that happening at DLA also?
It really is. So, in some cases, we've made some decisions specifically so we can meet our audit requirements. But at the same time, that allows us to put that data to work for optimization of our supply chains, improved planning and forecasting, an area in which we've traditionally had shortfalls because we were able to take historical demand but not look forward to potential demand. And so, this is an area where exchange of spreadsheets was our practice rather than constant exchange of data.
The third pillar that I mentioned is mission reassessment. Your name's the Defense Logistics Agency, so I imagine there's not a lot of room there for a dramatic shift in mission delivery. What does that look like from your perspective?
Well, if you center on the fact that we are a combat support agency, a CSA, and with an emphasis on combat support, an evaluation of all the things that we do and those things that directly or indirectly support our warfighters, specifically in their combat roles, is really necessary on a continual basis. And in many cases, there are missions that were assigned to us or that we sought for good reasons that now may not be the most appropriate one as we look at the order of business that we need to apply priorities to.
The fourth item is an infrastructure footprint review. What does that entail? Does that entail looking at where you're doing business, looking at where your customers are doing business, both of those other things?
Well, you may know that our posture as the Defense Logistics Agency is global. And as an example, we've got over 600 defense fuel support sites across the globe. We have over 24 distribution warehouses and other infrastructure that allows us to operate. In many cases, the location of those might be tied to legacy purposes. So we've had to reevaluate those, really match those to the National Defense Strategy and its priorities. Are we best aligned to support Indo-PACOM? Are we best aligned to support the homeland as well?
How often can you reevaluate those things? I imagine, given the fluidity of what's going on in the world, those are things that, at least moving forward, you'll have to be able to think about on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, really, that's what we've instituted now is this consistent, continual review where we look at risk, we look at where our assets are postured, and determine whether or not they're best postured. Of course, we don't do this independently. It's in association with the combatant commands and the services if we decide to divest of certain capabilities.
We have about a minute left. How will you institutionalize that into the way that the agency does business to make sure that that continues after your tenure is finished at DLA?
It's just a key procedural aspect that we've embedded into our processes. So we're constantly reviewing not only this question about infrastructure, but what it is that we do and how well we're organized to meet our missions and our responsibilities to the warfighter.
General, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for the time today.
You can read more about the transformation at DLA and watch a video General Simmerly recorded for the DLA team about the transformation on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, 4 possible paths for the future of AI. FedGov Today continues in a moment. What happens when artificial intelligence becomes the steady engine of government modernization? In the premiere episode of The 4 Futures of AI, presented by EY, you'll explore the growth scenario. See how federal and state agencies are laying a secure digital foundation to optimize public infrastructure and streamline daily operations for citizens. It's the slow and steady revolution driving the efficiencies government needs to sustain long-term economic dominance and global competitiveness. Watch Growth, May 17th at 10:30 a.m. on ABC7 in the D.C. area or stream worldwide at 4futures.ai.
Innovation doesn't wait, and neither do we. At Maximus, we solve problems. Streamlining operations, delivering solutions at speed and scale that drive measurable results. From strategy to execution, we simplify complexity, building trust through expertise and innovative technology. Every service, every time. Efficient government delivered. We don't follow innovation. We drive it. Maximus.
Welcome back. Today's debut day for a special FedGov Today presentation, The Four Futures of AI. It previews how artificial intelligence could shape the year 2030 for the government sector. Amy Jones is Public Sector AI Lead at EY. Amy, thank you for joining me, and thank you to you and your colleagues at EY for being our partner in the Four Futures series that we're about to debut in a few minutes. What was the genesis of it from your perspective? What prompted you to want to look at how AI is going to potentially drive the future for the public sector?
We were working with our global colleagues on conversations around how our clients might want to consider scenario planning for future outcomes. And in a lot of cases, on the commercial side at least, there's a lack of feeling of control of some of that. And so how do you sit down and you think about, well, how am I going to react, and what's the most likely scenario, and what resources do we have to have in place? And we went back and we said, there's a really unique opportunity for public sector, because as much reaction as there's going to be in private sector, and certainly there's some control there too, but public sector is really setting the foundation with the policy decisions, the investments, and the infrastructure to inform the outcomes in a little bit of a differentiated way. So we thought this was just a brilliant opportunity to have better conversations with our clients about what they can control, what they can't control, and how to think about a framework for the future that involves them as a driver instead of as a passenger in those outcomes.
Is it challenging to understand what different organizations can and can't control, given that we seem to be still so very early in the artificial intelligence era?
Exceptionally. And there's so many different players sitting at the table, and the rules are changing and evolving constantly, across the globe as well as domestically. We're finding in the United States, there's so many new policies coming out around the procurement of AI. What does that do? That informs how industry is investing in their AI. It informs how the data centers are being invested in. And so we see so many opportunities for that kind of supply chain distribution to be disrupted in a lot of ways, or impacted by the decisions that are being made in the public sector space.
I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation there are four elements, four futures that we'll cover in the course of this documentary. How did you determine that those were the four that you think maybe are most likely or most important to highlight, whatever the reasoning is behind those four different categories? This
is not an exhaustive list, and it's really meant to be more thoughtful framework by which to approach it. So growth is continued evolution. We think about the trajectory of technology and the fact that AI is going to continue to push us forward. We're not going to see a cliff. We're not going to see a huge, growth a trajectory that is changing in the pace, but we are going to continue to see progress. Transform is really where we see it embedded in all of the processes. We're seeing a comprehensive overhaul of the way that we think about how we take data in, how we process data, how we make decisions. So that really is kind of that huge potential opportunity. Constrain, perhaps there is an event, external or internal, where we start to see a bit of a contraction in the market, and that might be a risk posture, it might be a resource constraint, and then collapse really is where a couple of key players in the market take a big share of it, and we start to see a lack of distribution that we're seeing right now. So a little bit of a collapse in terms of the supply chain. They're not, like I mentioned, comprehensive, but they are a pretty good approximation for the scope of what we expect to happen over the next 5 years between now and 2030.
We have about a minute left. Growth is the first one, and that will debut at the after this program concludes. Separate from the research that you did for this documentary, what do you see public sector organizations struggling with the most as they're thinking about the now to 2030 runway regarding AI, Amy?
Data is always the first step. But more than that, the technology is changing. The innovation cycle has collapsed. And so trying to keep up specifically with the implementation of policy can become really overwhelming if you don't have a hardened policy to think about the four futures. And so what we like to see with our clients is conversations about the bigger picture and the strategy so that you can always come back to that goal or that objective or that central point, regardless of what's happening in the market. I don't know, there's been 7, 8 announcements in the last 2 weeks that are really impactful, and that pace is just unsustainable if you don't have kind of a core objective in mind. So data and policy governance around what your four futures look like for your organization.
Amy, it's great to have you here. Thanks again for your partnership to help us put this documentary together. You're a big, important part of it. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
The first part of the Four Futures of AI debuts right after this FedGov Today program. You can read more about it at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the Navy's readiness effort gets a shot in the arm. FedGov Today continues in a moment.
With the technologies that we're talking about, you have the opportunity to really perform a rapid look-back assessment over the past, pick your time period, to identify where your real risks lie and not your theoretical list from what you can brainstorm or how your programs are set up. Taking that approach first is going to allow you to really understand where your potential challenges are so that you can design a remediation program going forward to be able to address them live and virtually in real time.
One of the biggest things that we've been seeing within the federal government for quite some time is aging technology. So the systems are getting older and they're not being able to churn through the magnitude of data as quickly as is what is needed to be able to identify this fraud, waste, and abuse. So leveraging new and emerging technologies. Artificial intelligence obviously is at the front of a lot of the discussions we're having, but advanced technologies to be able to go through that data at scale and at speed that it's happening.
Welcome back. The Navy's new fighting instructions feature readiness prominently as a priority for the service. The hedge strategy included in the fighting instructions lists readiness first as an investment. Admiral Carl Thomas, U.S. Navy, is commander of Fleet Forces Command. He tells me about different aspects of readiness he's preparing for.
You hear an awful lot now about combat surge readiness and what do you need to be combat surge ready, and that's in an effort to be able to put more ships forward in a time of need. I think the one thing that's really important as the Fleet Forces Commander is that I don't let these standards slip. You know, if we're going to go out and we sent ships down to 4th Fleet and then they ended up in the Middle East and they're out there doing what we would consider major combat operations. And so it's very important that we ensure when we put a sailor on the line and a ship on the line that they are ready. And ready is a combination of the sailor knowing how to fight their equipment. It's a combination of the equipment being up and operational, not having issues. And then it's a combination of the team, and that's really where the time and the ability to integrate, what makes us kind of better than most is our ability to integrate across domains, across platforms. And you need time to train and you need repetition and sets to get that experience level. And so we can't skip on that because we're putting our sailors out there in harm's way. And so I wouldn't say the definition hasn't changed. I think we're looking really hard at how do we do things faster? How do we do them better using LVC and things that are capabilities that we can now generate repetition that maybe we couldn't in the past by virtually constructing things. So I don't think we're changing the standard. I think we're thinking hard about how do we do things in a more efficient manner.
Mm-hmm. As you do that broadly across the force, how do you think about that individually in programs of record, in how you train and equip, prepare sailors to execute on mission, all of those kinds of things?
Yeah, so really important as we bring in some of the great capabilities that you see around this floor. There's some pretty high-tech innovation. There's a lot of attempt to try to be more rapid. Sometimes we're really good at bringing things quickly, but we're not so good at bringing the training and the sustainment with it. So really, as a Fleet Force, one of my jobs is to look holistically across the DOT MIL PF spectrum, make sure that we're not shortchanging what the sailors need to be able to really learn and then support. You know, we've got ships that are underway for an awful long time right now, and that sustainment piece, whether it's doing virtual augmented maintenance and being able to use technology to help our sailors and maintaining their ship while staying forward. But really important that we don't skimp on the back end. It's really the shiny toys and the neat technology we see here all over this floor is fantastic, and it's going to make us the best. But we really need to make sure that it comes with the training so that sailors get it and know how to operate it.
You've made some tough choices in your service about some individual ships in the fleet and some classes of ships broadly. How do you go about thinking those things through, and what are you implementing to try to drive, as you just described, to drive more efficient, more effective maintenance and service across the fleet?
Yeah, I would say when you talk about decisions on ships, I'll pivot a little bit of the question towards where Sienna is going with a general purpose fleet, the one that you see out there operating today, and recognizing that not every situation requires an aircraft carrier or a destroyer and a submarine. And so you see a lot on this floor as we walk around, containerization. You see a lot of unmanned vehicles, with a lot of talk about automation. And those are all fantastic ideas. There's a place for things that cost less, that can maybe take advantage of asymmetry. So I think that brings in a whole nother aspect of how do you take the manned and these unmanned things and most efficiently train to them. And we're kind of on the early stages of how do we bring them into our workup cycle, learn, get it to the fleet, to get it in the hands of the JOs and the sailors, and then iterate on how we're going to utilize it. So there's some pretty good change happening right now in the Navy.
There's a term that a longtime guest of mine who's now in the Navy office at OMB named Jerry Hendricks has used, a term high-low mix, and it strikes me that as you describe that sounds like what
very much. Yeah, Jerry Hendricks has been very vocal about what he thinks the Navy needs to be going forward. I think if you read Admiral Caudle's hedge strategy, that's very much in line with what he has espoused, and so I think the Navy is trying to get there. I would just say that it's also a huge ocean, and so these things that we see that are maybe smaller and attritable, you got to get them there to the fight too. So
the idea of autonomous vehicles, then the thing that follows behind that in my mind is thinking of them not just as warfighting tools, but as data collection, information collection. How does your previous experience in the information and data field mesh with what you're doing at Fleet Forces?
Yeah, I think that we're working in a world that is becoming much more sensor saturated, and all those sensors create data. And quite frankly, if you think about future of warfighting, it's who can make the decision faster with the right data. And so as we build out a lot of the kit that you see on the floor, how do you ingest that information, make sense of it, and get it turned around to be able to make that correct decision, whether it's a weapon on a target or whether it's am I visible, am I not visible? And so data, the tools, where we're going with artificial intelligence and data analysis, that's part and parcel to the future of warfighting. And I think we do that better than most. And so I'm optimistic.
What's the process look like for sharing that information where appropriate with allies and partners in a combined force, as a joint force?
So there's the interoperability and the integration piece of it. And then there's the need to know piece. And clearly we have allies and partners of a lot of different levels. I think we're pretty good at bringing them in at the ground floor and making sure that we're going to be able to share the same data. That's certainly the networking that we have in place today, the IP standards and basis for most of our information sharing, and then the proliferation of satellites. That data is readily available. How we take each other's data, fuse it together, and complete the picture. So that's where we've got to go. We've got to work with our allies and partners in this.
That answer doesn't surprise me, also given your background experience in intelligence as well as data and information.
And it's got to be across multiple levels of classification. And so, we don't do anything by ourselves out there, and bringing along our allies and partners to have the same information we have and using their sensors to complete the picture. That's really important for the future of warfare.
Those big concepts that we've talked about in this conversation, we touched on the day-to-day sailor operations. How do you make sure that what happens here, the decisions that you're making and the strategies that you're implementing, make their way down to the sailor on the front lines?
Yeah, the good thing is the sailor today is a whole lot sharper than the sailor when I joined and me. And so they very rapidly adapt to these information systems. I think a lot of the companies are designing the interfaces is something that those sailors will recognize and be able to rapidly pick up. Certainly today with some of the tools that we have, you can create programming. I think that, as we look at how to use some of these smart systems, how do we teach our sailors to be able to adapt them and program them? And the tools are just getting better and better out there. So getting the AI and the capability into our sailors' hands, getting them comfortable with it, that will keep us ahead.
We just have a minute or so left, Admiral. I envy one of the jobs that you have in particular as we approach the 250th anniversary of the country and of the Navy, coincidentally. You're leading that effort as well to celebrate the 250th anniversary.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to tell our story, to show the American public what their Navy does for them. It coincides with the 250th birthday of our nation and our Navy. And so we had a fantastic week last week in Houston, and we're going to work our way up the Eastern Coast. We're going to have tall ships, international ships, and we're going to parade into New York City on the 4th of July and have the big International Fleet Review. It's going to be fantastic.
Admiral Carl Thomas. You can read more about everything we discussed on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. A transformation's underway at the Pentagon's Cyber Crime Center. Eric Oliver, Director of Information Technology and Chief Information Officer of the DC-3, will tell you about it on the FedGov Today podcast this week. You can follow the FedGov Today podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or subscribe on YouTube, and you can always listen on demand at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in just a moment. Federal agencies face growing cyber threats, tighter budgets, and increasing pressure to do more with less. Smarter security for efficient budgets and teams. The tech transforming government ops explores how government and industry leaders are modernizing cybersecurity operations, improving visibility across hybrid environments, reducing complexity, and using AI and automation to strengthen mission outcomes. Watch the full program now at fedgovtoday.com/smartersecurity.
And I don't think we're going to see the end of the human interaction in 5 years, candidly, because I think other attributes that are not easily replicated, like empathy and judgment and intuition and the ability to take a call in a direction where you're ultimately getting to the heart of why that person is calling and giving them a great experience will persist.
Tens of thousands of identical journeys, the ones taking the calls. And you can glean really critical feedback by including them in that improvement process. You can say, we've identified, here are 3 areas we'd like to improve, and ask those agents, ask quality analysts and specialists, ask supervisors, what are you seeing regularly cause friction?
Welcome back. You heard about it earlier in this program. The debut of the 4 Futures of AI is coming next. Episode 1 features the growth scenario. You'll see how federal and state agencies are laying a secure digital foundation to use AI. It's on ABC7 in just a few minutes at 10:30 a.m. You can watch it on demand, too, at 4futures.ai. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10. Thanks for watching. Have a great week.